Good evening. I am Lish Dore, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to One on One, where we bring to you some of the best minds in Trinidad and Tobago. Tonight's episode is based on Rowley's JAMETTE politics, language, and leadership. Now, last week, the national conversation took a very, very ugly turn when former Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley responded to serious allegations made by our sitting Prime Minister, the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, not with facts or evidence, but with insult. Not once, but repeatedly, Dr. Rowley called the sitting Prime Minister, the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, a Jamettee. Now, as ridiculous and as incredulous as this may sound to many of us, this behavior raises some serious questions, such as, what standard are we setting for public life in Trinidad and Tobago? And what exactly do we expect from leadership in 2026? Now, when the political discourse descends into name-calling, especially language loaded with gender and class prejudice, and let me repeat, when the political discourse descends into name-calling, especially language loaded with gender and class prejudice, it does more than attack a person. It drags down the level of the national conversation. It strips dignity from public office. And worse, we have to ask the question, what is this teaching the next generation? What is the message we are sending to the younger generation? And here is where it gets even more uncomfortable and dangerous. We are living in a country which has a big gender-based violence problem. Women are being brutally murdered as a consequence of domestic violence. In fact, it was the same Dr. Rowley, when he was the Prime Minister, who told the women of this country to choose your man wisely when he was addressing this issue of domestic violence that plagues this country.
He says, I'm not in your bedroom.
I'm not in your bedroom, choose your man wisely. I remember all of that. So, the question I want to ask is Dr. Rowley setting a good example for the men and boys of this nation by publicly degrading a woman with language like this? Is Dr. Rowley setting a good example for the kind of man women should be choosing? Is this the standard of masculinity we are normalizing in Trinidad and Tobago? And where are we going with this? Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar says she's unbothered, right? I think I read that in today's newspaper. She's unbothered by Rowley's Jamettete remarks. But this issue is far bigger than any one individual, even the Prime Minister herself. This is about us as a people, what we are willing to tolerate, what we excuse, and what we demand from those who are in leadership positions. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we unpack Rowley's Jamettete politics. And joining us for this critical conversation is the distinguished Professor Selwyn Cudjoe. First time on this platform, we are absolutely honored to have somebody like Professor Cudjoe here, and the very, very capable communication specialist, Jerome Lewis. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all our viewers who are joining us on Zoom and social media. We are live on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Please share the live. We are absolutely thrilled to have you with us tonight. And as always, we want to make the session interactive. One of the things that differentiates this platform from others is that we give you, the viewers, the opportunity to address the panelists directly with your questions and your concerns. So please, those of you who are on the Zoom, anyone is free to join the Zoom, right? The information for connecting is on our Facebook page. So feel free to join the Zoom, raise your hand if you want to make a contribution. Use the chats for questions and comments. Now, without further ado, I want to pass you on to my very capable co-moderator, Mr. Donnie Rogers, to give his opening remarks and kick off tonight's conversation. Over to you,
Good
Donnie.
evening. Good evening, Lisha, and thank you. And a very warm welcome to our very distinguished panelists, Professor Cudjoe and Mr. Lewis. We are very happy to have you here. Thank you for accepting the invitation. And I wouldn't be too long in my opening remarks, but I would just like to say that this issue with the utterances of the former Prime Minister is not a new issue. If the country remembers accurately, this commenced immediately after he became Prime Minister, when he would have made certain disparaging remarks of bodily fluids being found in PM1. And it started from there. It started from the onset of his prime ministership, and it digressed. It just got worse. It did not get better because, in my opinion, I think the public did not hold the prime minister then accountable to his behavior and his utterances. Um, and it has reached a level where it is actually ridiculous now, even in his so-called retirement. But, he says it's a retirement, but he's calling press conferences to, make these sort of remarks. And I think the country has had enough. Um, those are my initial thoughts on this. I would like to open the floor now. Professor, if it's you or Jerome want to start first, feel free to start.
Well, I guess if I go first, after Professor, I mightn't have anything to say.
So go ahead, man.
I
Go
guess
ahead,
I will go first. Thank you very much, Donnie and Lisha, for having us on. Great pleasure. I mean, this is the first time I looked at the program a couple times. Didn't have an idea that I would be on one day as a guest. So I think you all do a great job in terms of keeping the politics and talk, what I would say, social media alive. Let me just say this right now. I know in both of opening remarks, you sort of mentioned what Dr. Rowley would have said before about KPB 2.0, while she was in opposition and even now as prime minister. And I have a little different view on how this is measured, because the normal conversation out there is that this is a tit for tat. She said this and then he come and he said that. I think it's a little much more deeper than that. And it's part of the central argument in the article. What in my view, Donnie and Lisha, what we see going on here now, and this has happened before the election last year, and you see it going on now. This is a calculated takedown of the PM. But the overarching all of that is that in our culture, there's a part of the elite in Trinidad and Tobago that feels deeply that an Indian woman should not be the prime minister or running this country. Don't forget it, we have gone through 60 years plus of politics, which we sort of placed in the article as Creole politics. And if you're not Creolized, then you're not really seen as part of the structure to be the PM, to be the governor of the central bank, to be head of FCB, etc. These positions are seen for a certain class. So these attacks are much more deeper than just the regular word Jamettee of being a female prostitute. It is really a takedown in the sense of illustrating that Kamala Prasad Bissessel really, even though she got voter approval on April 28th overwhelmingly, should not really be running the country. In other words, it's some kind of fluke that she won the election, and it wasn't a real democratic victory for her and the UNC. And that is the kind of underlying narrative that is being pushed there. Now, Dr. Rowley made it clear when he gave up power, he said that he had no interest in office again. But what he didn't give up was the limelight. And ever so often, he comes out with these extreme positions, hoping to hit the headline, trying to be kingmaker on the background. What is not said is that he is the one who had power for 10 years and made a mess of government, of crime, of the constituencies mobilized by his own party. But that is not talked about in the narrative. It is always about Indian is big thief, Indians corrupt, and so on. And what is sparking in this conversation is the same politics that ran its course in the 10 years, why you shouldn't vote for the UNC. It is coming up now because somehow KPB is seen not as a legitimate leader. And I think what is even more hurtful is the fact that not only did she win the election overwhelmingly, she took major seats that have not been lost by the PNM for decades. We talk about Point 14, we look at Labrie, and then you could look at places like La Hoqueta, Talparo, Toko, Manzanilla. So she got a huge percentage of the black vote. What is also not said is that the same Dr. Rowley, 100,000 of his own voters decided not to vote for him. Not to vote for him. Others voted for her. That's why she has 28 seats at the moment. So I think wrapped up in all of this, and the central argument is, as a society, some of the things are not seen. She's not one of them. That's just my take on the central argument that we are making. And the country will take some time, Donnie and Lisha, to kind of get to the point where a person like KPB would be accepted as a prime minister. Now, just to underscore one final point on that. Some people would say, well, that is not the case because look at how many people voted for her. But then we have to differentiate between acceptance, which has a lot of variables in it, and compliance. Voters go to the polls for different reasons. Some people may have voted for UNC because they fed up a Rowley, they fed up a PNM, or they may have genuinely felt that she was the better choice. So you can't pin it down to one particular outcome to say that this is the way it is, because you have numerous variables playing out inside of it. And the notion that somehow that the constituency that left them and came across to make up these 28 seats are sitting there waiting for another 5 years to vote PNM again. That is not necessarily the case because you have the society is changing every single day. Global politics, people's own personal interests are going to change. And over time, the deciding factor will not just be on who is Indian and African, but there will be a number of variables inside of the voter's choice that's going to make a difference.
Jerome, I want to thank you for your contribution. I think before we get into any questions and so on concerning what you have just put on the table, let us hear from Professor Cudjoe.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you both for having us. One presume you had read our article, and I sort of endorse everything that Jerome has said. But I think it goes again, and I think he was trying to get a certain kind of mindset. You deal with a society, of course, which has been a slave society, which have all kinds of racial and gender stereotypes about people. Now, just in terms of decency, how dare you? You have a wife, you got 2 kids, I got a wife, I got 2 kids. Jerome got a wife and he has 2 kids. You have mothers. How do you, in the public sphere, say to someone, she's a Jamettee? Now, as we try to point out in the article, that stereotype comes up in the middle of the 19th century, when you had all of those characters, the Jamettee and the Marcos and all of those kinds of things. And so it means to me, if in 2070, you're still mining that stereotype, it means that you're lost in the past. You're a political dinosaur. You really have nothing to say. On a time when we are celebrating International Women's Day, where women, I know at my school at UTT, about 52% of the students are women. The population of 58% are women. Women are taking care and at the forefront. I don't care where you go, the States, to Trinidad. Women are now rightfully rising to assume their place in the political and social sphere, economical and otherwise, that all you could see in woman is that she is a Jamettee. Keith Rowley, as I call him, the leader of our grief and sorrows, still locates himself in an antiquated place which has no relevance to today's world. Any serious theorist or thinking recognize that they can't reduce a woman to her gender parts or social origins. Kamala, like most of us, began to sell in the market. Even within our own group, which are Hindus, where women were placed. I mean, of course, you remember the satire. If, of course, women did not produce or your husband died, you'd throw yourself on the fire because your only function was to serve your husband. Or when he dies, go back as a dullahin to the parents. And we have come all of this way. I grew up in Tagarigua. When they were going to the Shigestan morning, the men were like 10 foot in front of the women, 15 feet behind. We have left those days. Now, Kid Rowley's mind, this is a psychoanalytic thing, in the sense that, and Jerome alluded to the creolization of the society. You would remember a time when Indians were not accepted in this land unless they became creolized. We know nothing of the Ramleelas. We know nothing of the Ramayana. We know nothing of Hussein. And of course, which of course is celebration of the death of the Prophet Muhammad, God bless his name. So we are functionally illiterate in many ways. And when Rowley speaks in that way, he simply reflects his own ignorance. But as I think as Lisha said, is that when you begin to objectify women, they're not people. They're fit to be exploited and just simply thrown away. So 2 things I think we could probably begin the discussion is that PNM is solidly, or no, let me just be careful, Mr. Rowley is solidly located in an age that's gone and past. If a man had given that statement, I don't know we call the man what, he said it because he was all right? Secondly, the fact of the matter is that we are at a stage where, for example, that we should be speaking about people as people. Now, the other fundamental disconnect here is that the leader of the PNM, who happens to be a woman, and the person who was the head of the government business, Camille Regis Robinson, all those guys, no one had the courage to say, Mr. Prime Minister, or Mr. Ex-Prime Minister, or Mr. Ex-Leader of our grief and sorrow, on this one we disagree with you. We will not stand to allow you to disregard and disrespect women, particularly at a time when there's so much gender violence, when men are simply killing women because there is that sense of hatred. And if you dig deeper into Mr. Rowley's whatever, you'll see a fundamental hate of woman. And it goes back a little further. I remember writing in 2009 when Miss Camille Robinson had a meeting in Port of Spain and talking about how hard Keith Rowley was a hard man. I could go back to my article. I wrote against that, against the background of this thing, a man need a deputy. They were celebrating the hardness of men. They were celebrating the power of man's phallus. And now you come back. It's simply the continuation of an antiquated behavior. And we must all stand and speak out and say, that is not acceptable today. And those would be my opening comments. And I want to thank, Jerome, that's my friend. And he's much of the philosopher of his philosophy. And he insisted that we could not stand by and not make a comment. What you would notice that people have not commented about that. And they talk about the same thing, like he called she Oreo and he called she. It's not a tit for tat. It's a reflection of one's consciousness. And language is a script of the unconscious. As people like some of these philosophers tells us, it's a script. So what he's revealing is not about Kamala. It's a reflection of himself. One, a fundamental dislike for himself, a fundamental hatred for women, and a notion that he cannot leave that past. He shall not change. I would hope that simply the women of the PNM and the UN just disregard him. He is he's not a part of the contemporary discourse. So I think I'd want to just make those comments before we get into the discussion.
Well, Professor Cudjoe, Mr. Lewis, I have to say that your analysis of this situation was a lot deeper than I would have gone. I mean, you raised a lot of things that to me is mind-blowing. I did not see this as an issue against Indian women. But then again, I am not as versed into the politics and the history as you all are, And what can I say? All I can say is really, I hope that we are able to move forward as a society, because there really isn't any place for this kind of prejudice in a modern society, especially.
It's misogynism. It's not just India, it's a way of looking at the world. It's the way of seeing women. It's the need to educate ourselves about this new world. The young people ain't talking that damn nonsense. The young people not saying that.
I mean, that is if we just had carnival. I mean, carnival is a beautiful expression.
Right.
Togetherness. And I will tell you this, Professor Cudjoe, I also am from Tacarigua, and
what part of Tacarigua, girl?
I am from originally from Cane Farm,
All right.
and I live in Five Rivers. But
oh my God, good.
I went to Pagua celebrations, and this was my first in a long time. And I was pleasantly surprised to see how many different races are now participating in Pagua, which is a traditional Indian festival. Everything is becoming so multicultural in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is absolutely great.
But you remember the Husay riots. Most of the drummers were Black. You talk about Fabian Dinsley. Dinsley, of course, are Muslims.
Yeah.
We have been together. Tagarigua, El Dorado, Cane Farm. We have always been together. I could cuss in Hindi, But go ahead.
Like I'm from the East, right? Tacarigua. And I always say to people, when we grew up with every race, every race around us. That was the environment that I came from. And this thing about Indians not liking Africans is when I actually left how I should say it, the environment that I grew up from in, and went out into the wider society, then I became aware of
Is
that
that
kind,
right? Interesting.
right? But it wasn't a part of my upbringing at all, at all, at all, at all, right? So but what I want to get across to the viewers is we have to leave that kind of thing, as Professor Cudjoe would have rightfully said. It does not belong, that kind of thinking does not belong in a modern society. It's really prehistoric, backward thinking, any sort of prejudice based on sex, based on race, based on religion. We don't need that kind of thing moving forward in Trinidad and Tobago. And the younger generation does indeed have it right. They're not worried about these things,
You see,
Worried about-
a lot of this, Lisha and Donnie, Professor, is easier said than done, right? Sometimes, we give examples. We say, well, look, everybody would go to a CPL match, or we go to football together and we play mass together and so on. But that's only for that particular moment. In a real sense, you have, and in Dr. Rowley's case, you have a lot of grievances, people holding a lot of grievance, really because they feel passionate a certain way about how the country should be. Don't forget it, this is decades that you have had one government for most of the time in office. So even some of the systems, how it's structurally made up, you look at all the things like, the best village, and some people will say, yeah, well, look at our Indian participating and so on. But sometimes we live in denial and we close our eyes to really some of the actual events that going on around us. So we say,
But Jerome, you want to look at the empirical evidence.
Yes.
There are always, as you say, those variations. If I look at an election, and people always vote their own best self-interests, and I see the amount of Black people who have come over to support UNC and talk about anti-Kamala, it's a sense of a change in consciousness. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think what we can only work is on the evidence. You and I have always said, Jerome, in Trinidad and Tobago, yes, I mean, you like Julie Mango, I probably like Long Mango. But we all have discrimination. You like certain kind of woman, I like certain kind of woman. That goes with the human consciousness. What is important, though, as you said, and we always say, in Trinidad and Tobago, you don't hear anybody go up and kill somebody because he's Indian or because he's Black.
Yeah.
They don't have that.
Of course.
I mean, we call and say ill names and so on. So while there are residues of discrimination, or what I mean, people having dislikes, I think one really has to go with the evidence. The important part of that last election is that Black people said, listen, we do not like your behavior. Rowley tried to have a meeting during election. He had 6 people in Tobago. So it means that in many important parts, the nature of our consciousness is being transformed. But more importantly, we got to do what we're doing, is speak out against it. And in our own actions, there's a book by a fellow called Malcolm X. And of course, Malcolm speaks. And he was giving this lecture and so on and so forth. And a white woman came up to him and said to him, Dr. X or Mr. Malcolm X. He says, what could I do to change this situation which is so being racist? And he says, you go back to your community and you tell them. And when you hear hurtful words, you don't accept it. And I called Jerome tonight. He didn't hear me, gentlemen. I want to put him on the spot. In Miami, the Democratic candidate won again, Mr. Jerome, in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
And people look at behavior and act accordingly. But I think we have to take these signs in terms of the empirical evidence and keep pushing that narrative, and by our actions talk about a transformation. And I think that's probably the bright lights. I hear what you said. I think you're quite correct. but we have to look at the evidence. People came out, and I hear people, people want to hear the nonsense about PNM. And so it means that Rowley and those guys are a dying breed. He's 76 like me, a little older, a little younger. But how we look at things like homosexuality. Long time we used to stone homosexual, boy. And people now are saying, what's wrong with that? They're doing their thing. And your daughters and my daughters ain't making those distinctions. So I think that the question of transformation and change comes as, first of all, as we preach in our own, yourself and I. We've stood up boldly and say, we support you, NC. What they kind of call you? What name they call you? What name they call I? They will do that, but we must stand for what we believe is correct, push the narrative, and hopefully, I think we'll transform in historical sense.
I do genuinely believe that time is, I won't say the time has passed 100%, but I do think that you see that subtle change taking place.
Yeah.
It happened last year, April 28th. That was a major shift.
That's right.
You see it even in Tobago. They had one seat, and that just went across to the other side. So I think gradually we're going to see these changes. And I think that is what is driving, Lisha, the kind of grievance and the kind of distrust you're seeing on the other side in the politics. But I don't think what worked 10 years ago will work now.
Exactly.
10 years ago, to make a call, you had to use a dial phone. Now is AI doing that for you?
Yes, correct. All right, I do have one question for Professor Cudjoe before I'm seeing people with their hands raised, right? Professor Cudjoe, I believe it might have been somewhere around 2020, could be a little bit after, where I distinctly remember you making a statement that you believe the UNC is best prepared to deal with the challenges that face Black people today. I want you to maybe explain to our audience why you felt that way.
I felt that way for the first thing, that we say we are a multicultural society. For us to go any places, the races have to come together and accept each other. The UNC, if you look at the population breakdown right now in Trinidad and Tobago, Indians are about 40%, Blacks about 32%. Indians vote in greater numbers than Black people. And of course, a leadership. Remember, when you select, I don't know if you picked up what Jerome really said, that part of the animus against Kamala is that she's an Indian woman. You don't want an Indian woman to rule you. You seen all them puja flag going on, they're doing all kind of thing. And so in the mind's eye, you're not truly a Trini. You are some sort of additional force. So in the point of it, we are positioned, if we are pushing narrative, if in fact you have an Indian prime minister who's given to equality and equity, we have that, she has that right and that clout to push up to be us, to be more of a multiracial society. 1. 2, even though I think there are feudal dimensions of Hinduism in the sense of know your place, stick with your people, and so on. What we see right now among the younger people, they're breaking out of those silos. We are Trinidadians. Sat was my friend. Sat is a Trini. Even though I must fight for my people, as I must fight for my people, I'm a Trini. And so people are breaking out. Their primary identity is not their racial origin, but their national origin. So when they go to Pagua, I went up, you talk about Pagua, I went up to that thing where they have for Christmas up in, not La Pastora, what they have, the Parang. 15,000 people down, a mixture and peaceful, about 15,000 people in them are here drinking and so on. Perfect harmony. So I'm saying that we are positioned, and I speak in terms of being if you say a member supporter UNC, we are uniquely positioned to transform our society in ways that others could. I go last part. Franz Fanon says, each generation must find out what its destiny is and work it. The role and destiny of a civilization at Trinidad and Tobago 10 or 15 years ago is not the same role that we have today. First of all, Jerome talked about AI, we talk about the nature of, it's a transformed world. So our task is quite different from that task. If you see the last era, go say from 56 to about 70 and so on, that's their task. Our task is quite different. Our challenges are quite different, and some things are buried. And we talk about progress, you take the good and leave the ill alone. So that's what I meant. I think that UNC is uniquely, now you could either accept your role or don't accept your role. But if you see yourself as being special and called upon at this time in our history to transform it, not because you want to, because that's how things are. Folks are exposed. Look, 30 years ago, they didn't have AI and television and all. You are immediately, they just win the election in Trump just lost in Miami. We know it already. It's when I went to the States, we didn't have a telephone. We didn't have a telephone. We didn't have a TV. So it's a whole different world. And this our opportunity, as we are uniquely poised to transform the world, and we must all accept that as our destiny. And that's how I was thinking.
As well, I'll just add to that too, Lisha. The country is also at a crossroads. That change Professor is talking about there, it's not going to come easily. As he talked about Malcolm X. But, we have a saying that just leave things with time and it's going to work itself out. Not necessarily. Dr. King made it very clear. He said time is neutral. Nothing works itself out with time. You're going to have a lot of grievances. You're going to have a lot of pushback just to get things done. And if you notice, just on the regular headlines, if the Prime Minister just talk about X is a big story, about Y is a big story. And that's because it's going to take some time for the country itself to begin to make that turnaround. But as Professor rightly says, it's going to be the young people who's going to do that, not the older folks. The older folks, time pass. They still see this as how it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That time has gone. Nobody could make any prediction again without hard facts as to what the outcome of an election would be, in a sense, going forward, because the priorities are different, the challenges are different, the mindsets are also going to be different. And that combination is going to take us to a different level as we move on. And I think that the KPD is the right person.
But most importantly, the nature of cognition has changed. The way the cognition to know and how we know is a function of time. The young people, you take a computer or you take a phone and it's gone down, the 30-year-old and 40 don't know what to do. The young boy who is 8 and 9, that's their platform. The nature of their cognition, that is, how do we know what we know, has changed. And that's the critical point. You can't reverse that. Sorry, go ahead.
And I'm just saying too, and the PM in that sense is the best person to dismantle a lot of these structures. When you look at this whole, CPEP, of course, if you look at the workforce, probably maybe around, I would say maybe 90% Black, 20% East Indian. But in the main, you have a whole generation of people who should be in AI, either doing some kind of business in pharmacy, trying to be, doing something else than just cutting grass. How do you take a whole generation of people? And she's the best person to dismantle that. Why? Because she doesn't have to worry about her constituency. She don't have that worries as a politician. So she's the best suited to dismantle that and bring a common sense approach to this whole jobs factor. Yes, it may take some time. People out of work, they're waiting and so forth. everything has a sacrifice. Everything takes time. It is not a quick fix. It's going to take some time. But I believe that the time it's taking to make it right, you're going to have people doing much more structured jobs than just cutting grass. That makes no sense. And Rowley and they advocate for this thing for years. He was a guy who, in opposition, even when he was in Manning's cabinet, he said he had this great grand plan for the youths in Laventille and so on, but he couldn't implement it because, you know, they worry about what Sat Maraj will say at the time. Well, he had his chance in 10 years. It stayed the same way. You look at the crime and the home invasion, the young black fellas involved in that. All that came under his watch. And we have to call it out for what it is. We have to call it out for what it is. He presided over that. And at the end of the day, the question remains, how do you now make that shift? Everybody wants to see it happen overnight. Well, this is not FedEx. It will not happen overnight. It will take time. And it will also take, as Professor says, a national consciousness of everybody understanding what these hard factors are to make these changes as we go along. The other factor inside of this matrix, Lisha, as well, is the fact that the country doesn't have the kind of cash that exists 10 years, 15 years ago. So now you're working with a major constraint to get this done at this point in time. It will be done, but we all have to work together to make it happen. And I think the PM is on the right course. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in the party. I think she's on the right course, making the right decisions at this time to try and make this thing happen. And the beneficiaries of it will see the common sense approach to what this fix is all about.
I would just like to step in here, Jerome, on this topic that you're on about, the length of time it will take to see the turnaround. When we look at it from an empirical point of view, statistically, we have just come out from a 10-year period, an almost 10-year period of constantly declining statistical performance. It is impossible for an immediate turnaround at a high level. But at the same time, about a month ago on the same program, I would have released a study that I did that showed that we are seeing the turnaround, at least in the agricultural sector. And we are seeing production increase, we are seeing prices stabilize and those sorts of things. And this, in my opinion, is the embryonic phase of that shifting paradigm as to where we need to head. So we are seeing indicators statistically to show that the fundamental basis for this sustainable change that we need is actually occurring, right? And on another topic, as Professor spoke about an empirical position, and back to our topic before we move too far out from it, when we look at the losses that the PNM would have suffered in the last general election, and you all spoke about Point Fortin and more so Labrie coming to the UNC. Has Dr. Rowley realized that the writing on the wall has changed? And is his behavior indicative of, one, hasn't realized that things has really changed and people voted against his leadership? Or two, is his behavior indicative of a racial attack on the legitimacy of an Indian female prime minister?
Well, that's a question.
Yes.
Yes. Let's get in the listeners. Let's get in the listeners though. Let's get the listeners' comments.
I think Lisha's mic is off. Yeah.
She's off? Sorry about that.
I think her mic is muted, I believe. Yeah.
I want to say hello to all our viewers on social media. So we are getting now into the segment where we can invite questions and comments from the audience, right? Please unmute. I know you have your hand up. Please unmute.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to commend Dr. Cudjoe and Mr. Lewis for their sterling presentations and hitting the nail exactly on the head. I'd like to add a different dimension to the whole discussion, which is very pertinent. Looking at our political history, the PNM have always been, the ethos of the PNM and the strategy of the PNM has always been divide and rule. They have started that since 1956 with Dr. Eric Williams, and they continued on that vein throughout their existence. The only time that they were removed from office is when the country, the other opposition forces united. It almost happened in 1981 with the ONR. It happened in 1986 with the NAR. It happened with the Pandey regime in 1996 when the UNC combined with the COP and so on. And then it happened again with Kamala Persad-Bissessar and the People's Partnership, another coalition, another uniting of the forces in order to beat the PNM. And it happened again, here again with the coalition of interests in 2025. The only way to beat the PNM is for the people. As you rightly said, both of you all, the people, we have to educate our voting population and get them to understand we have to unite as a people. We are no longer Indians and Africans and Douglas and Chinese and Syrian. We are Trinidad and Tobago citizens. And if we are patriotic enough, we will unite to remove the scourge that is the PNM. And that is what we did in the last election. And that is why in 1986 it happened. And that is why the people united in 1981 with the ONR, with Carl Hudson Phillips. And the only reason why they did not win is because Pandey decided to go separately. But if Pandey had jumped in 1981, this change would have happened since 1981. And we as a population, citizens of the country, patriotic citizens, need to educate the others because the PNM have always divided the people. In 1970, they divided the NJAC, Africans against Africans. If PNM is an African party, why NJAC didn't survive?
Well, Trini, I see that people are agreeing with you online on social media about the divide and rule. Somebody has made a comment. PNM's politics has always been about divide and rule.
I don't know. I'm not too sure that's entirely correct. I do not quite support that position. Okay. And I could elaborate on it if you want me to, but I think that's rather simplistic. Mm-hmm. I think, should I speak, Lisha?
Sure.
Yeah. I think you have to understand politics in terms of people and responses. In 1955, you had the Bandung Conference with Sukarno from Indonesia, etc., when Black and brown people came together and said, down with colonialism. Of course, Nkrumah in 56, Azikiwe in Nigeria, etc., NASA, many things. So that was a very important point, because let me use these terms, the subaltern or the subjects were being oppressed. They came together, what? On the basis of nationalism. We must have our own nation. We must control our affairs. That was the major momentum in the 50s. All right? We must control our countries. At that time, progressive forces came together. Now, you have to understand, if you look at 1956 and go back to 1955 with the PDP under Barry Sagan Maraja, you'd understand that the PNM were already a metropolitan urban construct, where in all urban areas tend to be more progressive. Indians were rural in the sense that they were, and of course the population was greater. And of course, those people rose up to support these progressive movements. If you look right now in terms of go to the ANC and all of those liberal, those movements that carry forward in nationalism, they're now dying. This rule for the past 20, 30 years, then folks get tired. It is not that the PNM, I don't accept the fact that PNM was a divide and rule. I don't think that's true. But what happened when we had in 1981, whenever PNM lost, people got tired of their politics and people came together when that national impetus began to wane and see what it was not a racial thing, because we know in the main the PNM's base was black, the UNC base was Indian. It doesn't make the Indians racist. So it's not true to say that. More importantly, when you have, as you see right now, and then I'll end, let's go to Mandami in New York. He had an issue. The dominant issue was affordability. The Democrats are rising now because people are coming along a message. The message of nationalism appealed to people. It's not that they were racist. Tell me why is Williams racist? But what Williams was, he was a nationalist as the Jamaica National Party and so on. It go back to Ghana on Nkrumah. He was overthrown by whom? The chiefs. The Asante overthrew him because he was moving too fast. If we put it around a racial lens, we do not tell the whole story. And that's why I said it's so very important. We at another phase of our social development. Nothing remains the same. People are seeing things quite differently. You know the story. Like we have Indians in my country. They build big homes for the children. And them say, boy, we ain't staying here, now, boy, we going abroad and do we medicine and come back and so on. It's different mentalities. So I would think that I would not label the PNM as being racist, nor would I label the UNC as being racist. These people spoke to their own varied interests, and we were at a different stage of our social development. Today, we are quite different, where people could see beyond those racial lines and are coming together to say, is the PNM in our interest and acting in our interest? I think most people felt they would not act in our interest, and those who couldn't take them stayed home. And that's a vote also. I shall not participate in this. So I think it's too narrow a lens to simply talk about PNM racist and UNC is not racist. That's not true. So I would prefer, I could develop it.
The other thing,
I would prefer to look at it that way. I think it's just too narrow, because you don't become racist and then change. People act in their own self-interest. My position, PNM betrayed the black people who put them in power, gave the money and the jobs to a different group of people. And people says, no, we have had enough. We are moving on. So I think I prefer to see it that way. Not that my brother is incorrect about his analysis. My analysis is a little different than his.
Okay.
And it also, just before Lisha, just to add to that, and that is also adds to a part of the problem today with governance with the Prime Minister, in the sense that every move she makes, somebody could say, well, this is they see it as race, and this is why you have all this grievance with Dr. Rowley.
That's right.
And a certain elite group in the country who has boxed her in to say, listen, this woman she's not really the person to be running this country.
But Jerome,
this guy is not really the guy to run the central bank.
Let me just say,
hold on, Professor. This person is not the person who should be the head of FCB. Why? Because they're racial, and to protect our investment and the nation, they shouldn't be in place. And I'll give you one example of this madness and this narrative. You take a place like Unitrust, They say, no, you can't put an Indian in charge of unit trust because everybody going to lose the mutual fund investment. That is the kind of thinking you get when people come into office legitimately, UNC. So the narrative out there now is that you don't have an Indian person who should be in charge of unit trust because that is going to
Gerald, let me add one thing.
You're going to decapitate
but let me just
everybody's funds who has a vested interest in the unit trust. That is
Jerome, the worst manifestation of is that UNC wins. They say put too much Indian, but those are the people who support UNC. I gonna win. I mean, what absolute nonsense. That's not racism.
That is
These folks work to put you in power. We get in power and we show the other people to show we fair. It does not work that way. And so if you reduce it to crude racism, you're talking nonsense. You work to put UNC in power. These people from all over, they have to be rewarded for their services. One has to be moderate, but to say it shouldn't put in, because you're just talking nonsense. And so we can't reduce it to narrow racism. She wants the people in there who are going to support her, because we know a lot of those permanent sex and who have their interest in the PNM are sabotaging us. So I think you can't reduce it to naked racism. They're not the other factors.
Agreed.
Okay, guys, I want to welcome Dr. Lincoln Douglas, former minister and MP, to the program. I see, Dr. Lincoln, you have your hand up, and I'm very interested to hear your contribution to this conversation. So please go ahead.
Yes, Lisha, I have been actually writing about this situation in Trinidad and Tobago. I have 3 books that I've written on it. They've written in a sort of parable, but I want to come back to what somebody else said, that when, as a nation, you can't consider yourself a African or Indian, or this is not true. I think we have to be able to identify as who we are and be able to love other people at the same time. That is what we need to teach our children, how to identify who you are and accept other people. And that's why in some sense I have fought against the national watchwords, which we have is tolerance, discipline, and production. The word tolerance seems like you're just bearing with the person. I would like us to change that word tolerance to acceptance, that we have to reach to a place where we can accept the other people, and talk about what they are and attend their functions and go to their things without discrediting them. I was not raised with this whole racial philosophy, but I was raised in Christianity, and that gave me a view that all these things these people have, and all these monkey and elephant and all that, them thing wrong, and them things strange.
No.
So
that's absolute.
But we have to find a way where we can accept other people, accept them.
I am forced to break in.
Be ourselves.
I'm forced to break in. Give me 1 minute. A major theorist, Mr. Hall in London, says we have multiple identities. There's no one identity. I'm a man, I'm a Orisha, etc. When I go to dance, I'm a different person. There's no one thing that qualifies me and we must live. Hinduism is a religion. Catholicism is a religion. Islam is a religion. You can't talk about gods and all. That's what has taken us back. Learn to respect the views and religions of others. And remember that I could be a good Hindu and a good Trini. This thing at this we have multiple, the only thing, we have multiple identities. And let's start there and not denigrate the religions or the practices. My grandmother was a Shouter Baptist. She used to go by the Shango. She was no Christian. And what tells you that the Christians are the ones? No, I don't respect each other's religions. So I would just simply say that we could be a number of things at the same time. And do not put anybody in a box because we have multiple identities which comes out. So I mix up my grandmother, my great-grandmother's are Portuguese. So what do you tell me about? So I don't acknowledge. No, I don't think so. I think we gotta be careful about that. I think we gotta be careful about that.
Right. That I just want to add to that is that even in different people, with different religions, they have different value systems. So like, okay, in the Christian household, they might say, okay, you pray to God and so on, and that at the end of your life, you go to heaven. You get a good government job and you get gratuity at the end of it. That might be the Christian way of life. In the Hindu world life, it may be different. It may be to get into business, to open a tire shop, to do a pharmacy, etc., etc. So you can't pin it down to any one way of life for each group. And the key factor is that every person from each group gives up at some point all the free will in order for us to form the society. So, but what we agree on are certain rules. So we agree that murder is global. If you kill somebody, you'll be charged in the first degree. We agree we will stop on a traffic light on red, proceed on green, proceed with caution on yellow. We all agree to that, whether we're Hindu, Christian, Muslim, or Asian. But then inside of our own selves, then we have, as Professor said, our identities in which we determine our way of life, who you're going to marry to, who you want to associate with, what kind of job you want to be. Some people want to be engineers, some people want to be a rubbish truck driver. But these are all decisions being made by different groups of people, and that is what forms the society itself.
All right. Now I know we've sort of been talking now, focusing on diversity and inclusion a lot, right? I want to ask a question. Do you think Trinidad and Tobago is, well, how should I say it? Should we invest more in education and legal frameworks for diversity and inclusion? Would
Of,
that help of the
of
issues that
course, we should build a library on every corner. That's what Brazil did in the slums, and have everybody reading a book. Everybody reading a book, right? You start off with Trinidad history, and then you could mix that with other kinds of material, but just have them reading. And you probably, hopefully over time, will get a much more general sense of ideas, different kinds of ideas, rather than the just simple old talk, by the way, anyhow kind of operation, the way how we operate. But if you want to have a serious society, you have to put books in it, plenty books, and have people reading constantly. Because why? It opens up your mind. It gives you a much broader sense of the world. Is by reading. I didn't even know that the Straits of Hormuz, where these ships come through with oil, that Iran has these landmines there for how many decades, hundreds of years just planted. And depending on the depth of a ship that's passing through, it could just blow that ship up. So Iran has a special ship of a certain height not to touch these bombs. But I didn't know that. I thought it was just a waterway where ships just pass. But information and reading gives you a better sense. And I haven't traveled to Iran, I haven't been to the Middle East, but reading gives you a better sense of what is happening when you hear that the Straits of Hormuz is blocked. You have a greater understanding to balance the information coming from the news media, from the print, from television, to make a judgment as to whether or not it could be open tomorrow, next week, or 1 year from now, because you have fresh information. So reading does help.
Now, Jerome, my question was really relevant to education and legal frameworks for diversity and inclusion, right? I was asking, should there be more investment in education and legal frameworks for diversity and inclusion? I see Jeremiah here commenting that DEI education is relative to our education curriculum from as early as in primary school. But you know, we don't even use the term DEI enough, right? I think we don't speak enough about Trinidad and Tobago being a diverse country, right? We don't speak enough about inclusion. So this is why I'm suggesting, right? I'm putting it out there that perhaps we need to make a greater investment in education and legal frameworks for DEI, right? That's just something I'm putting out there. Guys, we're going to look to wrap up. I want to welcome Senator Brian Begg, who has joined us, right? Also, I see Trini, I know you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to make it quick. I know you want.
Donnie had a question that he had asked before, but Donnie, I missed it. So maybe you want to come back to it before you wrap up?
Well, it was just basically when we look at the results of the last general election,
Yes.
where there was an overwhelming vote against the current government.
Yeah.
The question was, is his behavior now indicative of not reading the room, that your typically strong voter base has voted against your leadership? Or is his behavior now some sort of racial / prejudicial approach to attacking the legitimacy of a female Indian prime minister?
Yes. Somebody else on?
Brian.
Somebody's mic is on. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's off now. It's off now. You can continue.
Right. So yes, if you go back, Donnie, to within that 10-year period, the campaign on the PNM has always been, don't vote for Indian. Indian is big thief. Indian corrupt. Look what happened in 2010, and they could go back and say, well, this one got a big contract and money was wasted here, money was wasted there, and so on, right? Very basic arguments that were made. Now, the problem with that argument is you could that probably, as Professor said, 10 years ago, it might have worked. But remember, a lot of people would have died. You have a new generation. Some people who were not even probably PNM or UNC reach the voting age, and in a new era. So when the election comes up, it's not based on what happened 5 years, 10 years ago. Just take the United States, for instance. You had Clinton went through all kind of deposition with Monica Lewinsky, right? But Obama still come and win an election for the Democrats. All right, because why? The circumstances were quite different to when Bill Clinton ran. It was about the economy at the time and so on. When Obama came, no, it was being the first Black president in 240 years. So this in Trinidad, the circumstances and the era quite different to 5 years ago. 10 years ago, it's changed as well. So even when we look at 2030 coming up, the circumstances will be different. It will not be based on what took place on April 28th, 2025. There will be a new set of circumstances, ideas, and relevance and interests for people to go out there and vote. Some of it, yes, you have your own supporters will vote for you, yes. Those who out there who are not sure where they want to go, these set of circumstances, they probably make up their mind on that. And it's okay, we'll take a chance here or we may take a chance there. Some people may decide to stay out. And that is the miscalculation, Tony, that Dr. Rowley made, that things would have remained the same. Correct. Recognizing now that he lost that plus Tobago back to back. He now turns into this hostile grievance to come back. Well, the PM had, talk about the parliament, about his father being a rapist and he's a rapist. That time passed. Everybody know that story. That story gone. He has his book, whatever it is. But I think what is hurting him now, and you look at the PNM, Williams came out with a legacy. You might dislike, Williams, you might say this or that about him, but his daughter still put up this big, the thing at the university, what do you call it? Not the shrine, but with all his papers.
Williams collection.
Collection.
Yes.
You look at Patrick Manning. When people talk, they say look at the Hyatt. They say look at Brian Lara. Manning connected to something still with a legacy. Look at Rowley, who has come out of the politics, connected to what? High crime, the economy in a mess, and he just cussing everybody and talking race. So his time came up and he recognized that he wasn't going to get back and decided that he will give it up. Not that he give it up. He doesn't want to give up the limelight and wants to step back in to show, well, okay, here I am, I'm strong. I am really the voices, not Penny, but I'm the person who could bring this party back because but that time has passed. Nobody taking on that anymore. That time has passed. His time has passed. He's still operating a Nokia phone. He's still using a Nokia phone and a pager. We're using an iPhone right now. Time pass.
Yeah.
I'm
very happy.
Oh, you want Mr. Begg?
Sorry,
you want
sorry,
Mr.
Professor.
Begg to speak first? Yeah. Mr. Begg, right? Let him speak.
Yeah, okay. So guys, let me just do a quick time check. It's 9:18. We normally wrap up by 9:30. So we can take the comments from Senator Begg, Trini, and then we'll get into close.
A tiny thing before you close, and it would not take anything. Your question has not been asked. Should there be more education, more money placed in education, and greater emphasis on DEI? I think that's the question you asked.
Yes,
yeah, no, that's not what you asked. I think the other question to ask really is education for what? We've spent, in terms of per capita income, we spend lots and lots of money in education. And we spend money in education to get a citation, a PhD from here and a thing online and so on and so forth. What are you educating people for? I wouldn't answer the question. But after all that money we place in education, we are more uneducated today than we were probably, give them the thing, about 50 years ago. People read. People know why they were being educated. It created values, etc. Now you go and just do a line thing, get a next PhD, next LSE, all these online courses. You must ask yourself, how valuable are they? And last answer, and I would leave you alone, is that how do we conceive education? It's not simply the acquisition of knowledge. An educated person is how does one act purposefully in one's social environment. It's not more money. How does one act purposefully in one's community to transform that community? What are more, I hear my friend, I can't expose them on the air, but my friend Jerome says, he don't want no more things. He don't want more car and more so on. He wants to be a better person, a more educated person, because things go, things perish, but the person of educated in the sense of a sophisticated person is important. Raising our intellectual and cultural standards is what we should be aiming for. Not more money necessarily in education, but education towards what end? And then we tailor our education to that. I would suggest, since you know Jerome very well, or we like to come back on, Jerome, and don't talk about Jerome, don't say a word. But Jerome speaks a lot about education in Miami. That everybody is trained for something. You don't go to high school. Yeah, people are trained. Jerome don't say much about it. But I think more as an educator involves more people, not just becoming a doctor and a lawyer, teacher. That people, in terms of AI, in terms of the people are educated to perform where they are, which brings them a certain degree of self-satisfaction. That's what education about. Make you be self-satisfied rather than trying to grab. Jerome talk about the fact that the last PNM, he talked about Williams. Williams is dead with no money. Williams' daughter still a secretary in Miami. Chambers' daughter worked in the consulate in New York. When the PPP got up on the fire, she had no work, she had no money. Mr. Manning dead, he still live in a 2-story house, the 2-bedroom house in San Fernando. Look at all of the members of that present last parliament and find out how much money they have. They were making money, not making knowledge and ideas. And when you switch to make money the God, and you genuflect at money the God, what happens inside? The spiritual and the cultural dies. Do not cling on to things.
You got a standing over a sitting ovation from me there. Could not have said any of that better. So,
Yeah.
Senator Beg, please unmute.
Laverne.
Good night, everyone.
Hello,
Good
Brian.
night. Good night,
I
Senator.
I do apologize for joining so late, but as you know, in my current circumstance, I had to endure some medication.
Yeah.
But you know, I caught coming down to the end, and let me say good night to Professor Cudjoe, and good night to Jerome. I have
Hi,
to say,
Brian. Good to hear from you, man.
you know, it is that a leopard cannot change their spots, and a tiger cannot change their stripes. So Dr. Keith Rowley, in fact, that man has made me don't even want to call him Dr. Rowley or even former Prime Minister. He has continued to show why he and his party will be rejected of that style that they operate in. And I'm happy that the Prime Minister has made it very clear she's not going to take him on, and I agree. He is a man of the past, and you must keep him as where he is in the past. And I hold to the view that I said about what he said. It is very disgusting. It is very low, but I expect nothing as different from a man like him. And I am happy that we, as a party, we as members of this party stood up for our leader. I will not sit on a bed recovering from life-saving surgery and listen to the nonsense of what has been said and not defend my leader. No one shall attack my Prime Minister and my leader. I shall remain unscathed. With any breath in my body, I shall stand and fight for the lady called Kamala Persad-Bissessar Senior Counsel. This is a lady who has led this country, and she is the reason why we need her as Prime Minister. And she has come in 11 months. In 11 months, this government, led by Kamala Persad-Bissessar, which I am part of, I'm proud and happy to be part of, what we have done in just 11 months, the People's National Movement could not have done in 5 years and 10 years. We have put persons to help and lead this country, develop this country, not only at the parliamentary level, but also at the levels to ensure that our country operate. And so we have men like Professor Selwyn Cudjoe, and where he is. We have people like Jerome Lewis. And I want to commend Jerome with his team, led by Minister Michelle Benjamin. One of the best carnivals, if not the best carnivals, in how long? And I must say, Jerome, that you all have did exceptional work.
Thank you.
Dr. Cudjoe, Professor Cudjoe, sorry, what you're doing with UTT, I know it will be exceptional as you are chairman there. I expect nothing better from you, sir.
Thank you.
And this is the reason why Kamala Persad-Bissessar is Prime Minister.
Thank you.
She didn't just put people there to say, well, we go put people there. No, we have put people where we are able to perform. We have put ministers and ministries where they can perform. The problem is that a former Prime Minister, Patrick Manning, and a former Prime Minister, Basdio Pandey, said that the PNM don't like facts. In fact, Mr. Pandey said that. And Mr. Manning said that facts is a stubborn thing. They don't go away. The facts that we have is have shown that what we are able to do is bring proper governance to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And we are doing that still. We are just 11 months in office. And look at what we have done so far. So the man they call Keith Rowley, sir, you're a relic of the past. Stay in the past as far as I'm concerned. Because your own party don't even want you. And the country don't even want you neither. Have a good night. Continue to have a great day. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. I know Trinity the Bone has to say something as well. I know we'll have to come up because I'm struggling to speak to you all now. So have a
Thank you.
good night, you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Brian. Good to hear from you, man.
Yeah, he has some health issues, but I
Yeah.
really do appreciate him taking the time to come on this
Of
program.
course, of course, of course.
You missed you on this program, Senator Begg, so we actually are
Yeah.
waiting, getting better, so you could come on as a panelist. Right? I want to ask Professor Cudjoe or Jerome, do you all have anything to say with respect to what Brian would have contributed?
Well, I agree with him in the sense that you know, I think the Prime Minister has, in terms of her leadership on, this second time around as Prime Minister, is a lot more targeted and focused because she understands what the real issues are out there and what is needed to be done, right? To take a project like CPEP and take it apart, yeah, you may have people not working and so on, but it is something that no Prime Minister would do ordinarily. Why? Because it has a lot of political backlash with it. But she took the decision and she stood by it. As I said, to work out the new jobs for people who are in that specific area, that is going to come, but these things, it will take some time. But you can't restructure the society and keep everything the same way. It's the same way, same she, Professor Cudjoe is at UTT, and many of you would know UTT was more of a kind of an engineering place and so on. But that might have made sense when we had a lot of oil and gas. Now you're into AI, you're into all this chip, you're talking about NVIDIA and so on, having all these super chips on the market. So you may want to kind of tweak what's going on there and to bring to the front your point, Lisha, about education. If you go to a national university, you have to know about Trinidad and Tobago, you have to know about Hinduism, you have to know about Christianity, you have to know about Islam, you have to know about the Orishas, Baptists, everybody, because all of that forms part of what Trinidad and Tobago is like. And it should be coming from that level of power. And Professor Cudjoe has a great opportunity to make that shift if it's one thing that he can do. So I think her positioning of people, you look at Minister John in Works and Transport, right? Doing a massive blueprint for Trinidad and Tobago, encompassing the whole nation. It's not a blueprint for UNC areas. It's a blueprint for Trinidad and Tobago. And every day you see Miss John on the march from 5 o'clock, sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning, just there moving, going, and so forth, right? You have a guy like Tanko in finance, working the numbers, trying to see how best he could get the budgets right so that we could really inject the cash where it's needed, etc., etc. They've been able to settle public servants in the first 9 months and so forth. Then you have others, teachers, and so on. So I think it's a lot of work going on simultaneously, and it's gonna take some time for some of the things you're gonna have happening right away. Some is gonna be take a shorter time. Some is gonna take a longer time. But I think she's making the right decisions. The alignment with the United States, I just want to touch on that. I think it's the right decision to do that. We are 1.2 million. I mean, just look at just yesterday, I saw the U.S. Embassy is going to spend 500 million US to build an embassy. I mean, just to build an embassy in Trinidad, just down where the old country club was. 500 million US just to build an embassy. That's the kind of firepower. For all the critics who talk about you shouldn't align with America because you like Cuba, you like Venezuela, etc. America remains the strongest economy in the world at 27 trillion GDP. China stands at 17 trillion on the GDP. Even though, I mean, they have high production, high output, etc., etc. But even with all this war going on in the Middle East now with Iran and all these bombs and so forth, that costing $1 billion a day, the markets are still strong. And Professor Cudjoe, you have investments, so you know that. The markets are still strong, despite the fact that you're spending $1 billion a day up to 39 billion, and you're looking for another 200 billion to spend, and your economy is strong. We, Trinidad and Tobago, can't even withstand a shock of 100 million TT. Can't, because we're too small. So yes, we have to have alignment, and it's just common sense to go with the flow at this time. All the folks out there, even Rowley and the PNM, who saying, well, you know, you shouldn't, what would they have done differently? Think about you have a whole sanction on your country. All this nice stuff we enjoy of imported cars, food at massive stores, etc. All that gone with sanctions. Eh? Just think about it. So the people who are making the claim that we shouldn't go this way haven't said to us which way to go. Well, you must remain neutral and about your sovereignty. Oh, you're right. All that makes no sense. You have to take a position, which she has taken. She stands by it, and we will see how that goes as time goes along, because they're working it out. If we get help in security to protect our borders, we get help to help train our police force so that we have a higher detection rate and so forth, etc. All that is going to be helpful to us in the future. And America has the resources to do that, because they could spend billions easily, which no other country could do. No other country. I don't care what the critics out there see, but that is the way how they function as a democracy.
Jerome, you said a lot of things there that I would really like to get deeper into, but we don't have the time for that. But maybe on another program, if you all come back, we could sit and shout a lot of things.
Usually when Cudjoe and I come on, we take like 4 hours. You know?
Close up at 9:30. It's now 9:35. Trini has had his hand up for a long time. Trini, you need to make it quick though, and then we will take closing remarks.
Good evening again. I just wanted to clarify what I meant by divide and rule. I never focused on race in any way. Divide and rule, one of the major divisions that the PNM creates with their innuendo and rhetoric and their strategy is to divide between voters and non-voters with their rhetoric, with this Jamettee politics and that kind of nonsense. They've gutter politics. A lot of our electorate, 45+% of our electorate does not participate simply because they are disgusted with the type of politics that is portrayed and that have been portrayed for the 70 years by the PNM. So they demonize all the other opposition forces. And when you have 45% of a population divided, refusing to vote for either one, that is the strategy of the PNM. Less than 30% actually vote for the party that is going to rule. And that is foolish in a democracy. And that is the divide and rule that I was talking about, where they divide in terms of class, in terms of oil and sugar. No, we might say oil and sugar is race, but it is not. It is not. And in today's electorate. We have educated and uneducated, and a lot of the educated people refuse to vote because they don't want to participate in the gutter politics. And one of the reasons that nobody is paying credence to why the UNC was able to be successful in this last election is the UNC tried very hard to stay away from the gutter politics. The PNM kept on with it, but the UNC stayed away from that. And that is what we have to keep doing. Unite the people as one patriotic group. Nothing to do with gutter politics, and be progressive in our thinking and our politics. And that's the message that we have to get across there. The education that you're talking about, Professor Cudjoe, is exactly that. And you said it just now, Mr. Lewis. That's what we have to. That's the attitude we have to go forward with to stay in government. That's why no other government got more than 5 years. That is why no other party that replaced the PNM, they were able to degrade, demonize any opposition of the PNM.
Okay,
Right.
unfortunately, we're out of time.
We're
So
out of time. I had one point I wanted to make on that, just
yeah.
quick, right? And then Professor, you could wrap it up, right? Just what the gentleman was saying there. This country has this grand notion that somehow we have, prominent people. They probably write in the newspaper and so forth. But this country, in my view, and I'll give an example. When the party was looking for somebody to be president, they asked a couple people. I wouldn't call their names, but the only person who raised their hand was Israel Khan at the time. And you know what some of them said? Well, if we raise our hand, people will brand us as UNC and we get tainted and so forth. So nobody wants to make no sacrifice to join anything. But once you come into power, they show up, they want to be senator, they want to be on this big board, they want to be head of this, head of that, etc., etc. And that is why sometimes this place going nowhere. Because those who call themselves and who we see as this big prominent, they're writing and all of that. Ask them to serve. They never show their hand. Why? Because they don't want the names associated. And that is why people like Big, Professor Cudjoe, I raise my hand. I raise my hand and say, yes, I am here to help. I am not in no background. I am played my cards on the table, not under the table, Lisha, on the table, win, lose, or draw. And that is how you build a nation. Trump asked a guy to head ICE. The fella put up his hand and just went through a hearing. And was confirmed. He didn't stay in the background and say, well, ICE have all these litigation from Minnesota and 2 Americans were killed, so I don't want to be involved. He raised his hand and said, look, listen, I will join this thing because I want to make a difference and we could do it differently. And that to me is what makes sense in our politics. The other part of it sometimes make no sense.
Thank you for that, Jerome. Professor Cudjoe, any closing remarks?
Well, I know that you've been out of time. I just make probably two comments. One, and I go back to I don't want to do a tit for tat, but if you could spend an hour or two condemning the political dinosaur for using certain names against Jamettee and so on. I think we have to get away from the notion of gutter politics and all that. That's not analysis. It's throwing names around. We got to deal with analysis. In the United States of America, probably half of the population who are eligible to vote are not even the voter rolls. In fact, when you decide out of that 50% and you get 30, it has nothing to do with race and so on. They just are not interested. So you can't condemn us because only a certain percent vote and so on. It's also their right to say, I don't want to take part. So I would not go for the gutter person. I think we have to raise it a level and say, look for the sociological and political reasons why people do what they do and try to do a sociological analysis of it. So I don't think they got the politics and all that stuff. People make their mistakes and they pay for it. That's the first point. The second point I think I'd like to make, and just I want to endorse everything that Jerome says, but I want to leave an additional message. At the end of the day, it's all up to us. Whether we do it or leave it aside, whether we're contented to stay where we are or transform the nature. We must get involved. Jerome gave the example of that guy who got put his hand today. We took a position. 270 said, listen, this nonsense ain't gonna work. And we came out there and put ourselves there, call we all kind of name. So my thing is, and you talk about education in the best sense, education that liberates, that make us more aware. Jerome talked about reading. We have to get away from this narrow, just throwing names. And the last point is that we have a glorious opportunity to transform our society by doing what? Participating. And I think the only thing I want to say is that there's nothing in the stars that says we must go forward. There's no sociological theory. You could go forward. Marx believed you went forward and there's always progress. Another theorist says, no, it's not necessarily you go forward. Societies go forward, societies go backward. It's up to us. And I think our challenge, who believe in what the UNC is doing, particularly what CAMA doing, is to get involved and try to transform. And I saw Mr. Jerome quoting Mr. King, and he told me the whole, a love that liberates. That's what King says. All right, a love that liberates. And it's powerful. It's not just, Gandhi said the same thing, but let's go forward in love and trying to transform people and say there are other parts to what self-liberation, self-righteousness. If you want to go and read Gandhi's, the Gita according to Gandhi, you understand what it talks about, struggling for equanimity. And of course, his major thing, which Jerome was trying to get to, desirelessness. At the core of Hindu philosophy is desirelessness. Don't cling to eternal things. Cling to the other things. And I think that's where we have to go and divest ourselves, all those negatives. Let's try to be positive. And I think that is really the message, the newness of having people transform from one party to another, getting in, working together again and kissing and so on. I think that's one of the ways to go. So that was my only message. My parting message is, let us get in and be activists. Let's put our hands where our mouths are. And don't be afraid to declare your independence, that we are rid ourselves of that negative nonsense that the others left behind. We must go forward.
Professor Cudjoe, that's a very, very profound closing statement. You made your message about transformation. Let's try to be positive. People are always telling me they're so fed up of the negativity. That's it's only back and forth and fighting, and they just negativity. Donnie,
let's have a program though. Let's have a program though, which is my baby. We know nothing of our past. Life did not begin in 1956. Abercrombie came in 1797, and we've been going. We had a lot of laborers and people coming in. Let us know something of our history. That's the thing that pains me most. None of them knows a thing of our past history.
And we could do a program on that. We could have a series on that. We'd love to.
My boy is Mr. Jerome. Talk to Mr. Jerome. We'd love to do that.
Any final remarks from you before we close off?
Who, me?
Donnie.
Oh, Donnie.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear the name. Sorry, my apologies. You know, Alicia, this is one of the programs in which I deliberately was quite silent because I felt like a sponge just absorbing knowledge and really good and practical perspectives. So I really have to hand it off to our guests today, and I think definitely they will have to be back. Jerome and Professor, you all were wonderful. I honestly learned a lot tonight from you guys. And as simple as looking at things from a different perspective. Thank you for being here. It is my personal opinion that I think the utterances of the former Prime Minister only work to sink the PNM further into an abyss, and it highlights the internal fractures that currently exist within the PNM. Because up to recently, with this last comment, you would have seen the opposition leader take one position and Ms. Robinson Bridges take a totally different position and come out and basically defended the former prime minister. And I think the more he is involved externally in the politics, the worse he makes it for the PNM. So that is my position. And somebody started some Latin music, you know. That is my position. Thank you guys for being here. Lisha, over to you.
My pleasure.
Well, I want to say thank you, Donnie. Thank you so much to the distinguished Professor Selvin Cudjoe. Thank you, Jerome Lewis,
Thank
who
you.
have organized tonight's program for us, making the link with Professor. We really, really appreciated it. I mean, this program for me was fantastic, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers would agree. And your presence here, both of you all definitely added I would say more flavor to our program.
Thank you.
Looking forward, seriously looking forward to having you all back. And you know, I really, really hope you all can join us. We could even tailor the program to whatever topics you all would like to discuss. Professor Cudjoe, I know you are so knowledgeable on so many things. So
But you know, let me make a suggestion. Jerome just buy a big book on justice and philosophy like that. And I just bought a big book on The Machine is Not Consciousness. Those are the kinds of programs that leap years ahead.
Yes.
AI is not consciousness. It's a great big calculator. It does not have a soul or a spirit. Let's talk about the future. Leave them fellas behind. Jerome, you can talk about your boy. Listen, man, this boy has read. I mean, again, he has read so much. So the point is, let us go forward, not the tired old jargon about they and got that thing. How do we go forward? What's the nature of consciousness? What's the nature of justice? How do we speak about justice in a modern context?
Now, Professor, you have me very excited. I am willing to work on a series right away. You know, that is so my kind of language.
But listen, what we're going to do. We're going to ask you all to read at least the first chapter. So you have a sense of where we're going.
No problem. Send me. We will do it. We will definitely.
All right, guys. Thank you.
All right. Members of the media who have joined us tonight, and I want to end by saying that there is no future in the past. There's no future.
I like that. No future in the past.
Rowley and his brand of leadership. What do you all call him? The former leader for grief and sorrow.
The leader of all grief and sorrow. Get it right. It has not changed. He still causes of grief and sorrow. What is your problem? Don't even call him name.
It's a Dr. Rowley, the former.
No, call him the leader for grief and sorrow. Forget all the doctor, whatever.
Well, he is definitely a thing of the past, and there's no future in the past.
Yeah, darling.
So I will end on that note.
Thank you.
Join us again next week, Tuesday.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are we still on?
Oh,
yeah, Lisa would just end the live.
Okay.